Good afternoon, all. And the subject of my video today is how an autistic person is misinterpreted and misunderstood by the Florida Bar's lawyer, regulation, disciplinary prosecutors, and why it matters. And the absurdity of it all, particularly in the face of the 2004 hurricanes and our more recent hurricanes, Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, and the devastation and destruction they visited on the state of Florida, and the sentiment of so many that if they live in one of those evacuation zones, that maybe they're going to get the money together and move inland, move out of state, move somewhere else, but not continue to stay at Hurricane Strike Ground Central. So the first thing is that the Florida Bar has this prosecutor, and his name is James Keith Fisher. Florida Bar number 142158. And I do have to say, anybody who's found themselves accused by this master of deception, you might want to listen to this video. And you also want to listen to it if you're autistic or you have an autistic family member, because autistic people like me get dragged into the state court system no matter what, no matter how hard you try to stay out of it. And the results are always to abuse the autistic person, their family, and to impose devastating financial and punitive measures against autistic person and their family members. To start with, this is James Keith Fisher. James Keith Fisher, he is an active member of the Florida Bar, and he has been a Florida Bar prosecutor. Now, James Keith Fisher also has a martindale.com attorney page. Here, it's listing him with the address when he was a Florida Bar attorney disciplinary prosecutor. He attended university and got his Juris Doctor degree in Wisconsin. He was first admitted to the state of Illinois and then Wisconsin. And what's important about that to know is that when you're admitted as a member of the bar to the state of Illinois and the state of Wisconsin, it is almost a 100% guarantee that your state has never been hit by a hurricane. That's 100%, just about basically 100% guarantee. So, Mr. Fisher first practiced law in Illinois and Wisconsin before he obtained his Florida Bar admission, and after his autism abuse of me and his false statements, his knowing false statements made to the Florida Bar to discriminate against me because I was an autistic witness in a disciplinary case he brought against my husband, and the knowing false statement by half-truth and concealing part of the facts he was required to disclose. He then jumped in 2023 to obtain a South Carolina bar admission. One can only wonder if Mr. Fisher disclosed on his South Carolina bar admission application, if they have the question most committees have, is there anything else you want to tell us? Well, yes, he should have told them he discriminated against an autistic witness and abused one. And he should have told the South Carolina bar examiners on his admission that he filed knowingly false statement to obtain the disbarment of my husband, David Frank Petrano, and that he made a false statement by half-truth and concealment of material facts he had to disclose. So, Mr. Fisher has now moved to the South Carolina Attorney General's office in Columbia, South Carolina, where no doubt he's going to do more of the same or worse. James Keith Fisher has been bar counsel for the Florida bar for quite some time, and he was the Florida bar counsel prosecutor who prosecuted my husband, David Frank Petrano. And James K. Fisher took away my husband, David Frank Petrano's attorney license on the basis of committing fraud to the Florida bar referee, and ultimately when they decided if they were going to adopt the recommendation of disbarment to the Florida Supreme Court itself. Now, James K. Fisher, Florida bar prosecutor, started practicing law in Illinois and Wisconsin, where there are no hurricanes. There are no hurricanes. Well, so, James K. Fisher falsely claimed in the Florida bar's response to order to show cause at page 5, paragraph 11, that he filed against my husband, David Frank Petrano. At the same time, at the start of the proceeding, he continued to repeat, my husband and myself were basically a husband and wife team. So, by innuendo and colloquium, Mr. Fisher defamed me as well when he made the false claim. Respondent's history indicates that he moves from circuit to circuit throughout the state of Florida, littering the next respective circuit's judicial system with frivolous pleadings. Now, that statement was mentioned to be false in a pleading my husband filed, and this is in Florida Supreme Court case number SC14-2287, and it was my husband David Frank Petrano's respondent's reply to order to show cause to sanction him. Why is that statement knowingly false and fraud with scienter, made by James Keith Fisher, Florida bar prosecutor and bar member of the state of Illinois, the state of Wisconsin, the state of Florida, and the state of South Carolina, who's working in the South Carolina Attorney General's office? Well, let me show you. And here is the Florida bar referee serving a document in the disbarment case. Florida Supreme Court case number SC14-2287 on James Keith Fisher, bar counsel for the Florida bar. Well, what was so special about 2004 and the 2004 hurricane season? Well, the 2004 hurricane season in Florida was devastating, with 4 hurricanes causing billions of dollars in damage and many deaths. Hurricane Charlie, the first hurricane to make landfall in the U.S. in 2004, Hurricane Charlie caused $16.9 billion in damage and 10 direct deaths. It was a Category 4 hurricane. damaging or destroying thousands of homes and knocking down tens of thousands of trees. Hurricane Frances caused at least 49 deaths and $10.1 billion in damage. Hurricane Ivan was a Category 5 hurricane that caused catastrophic damage in Florida and other Gulf Coast states, resulting in over $26.1 billion in damage and 129 fatalities. Hurricane Jeanne caused at least $7.94 billion in damage and 3,042 deaths, making it one of the deadliest Atlanta hurricanes in history. The 2004 hurricanes caused more than $45 billion in damages and forced an estimated 1.6 million people to temporarily or permanently relocate. Now, it says right there, James Keith Fisher is a licensed lawyer in 4 states, including Florida. That means that he has to be deemed intelligent enough to get on the Google and Google in Florida's hurricane history, because after the 2004 hurricanes and all that devastation, it was not unusual, and it was very common for people who were in those hurricane evacuation zones to, quote, temporarily or permanently relocate, end quote. And Hurricane Frances and Hurricane Jeanne both came over Clearwater Beach, where my husband and I were living on the Canandaigua, my husband's sailboat. And we were on Clearwater Beach. We were in a storm surge evacuation zone. But more than that, the landfall of Hurricane Charlie on the morning that it was coming up the west coast of Florida and going to make landfall had Tampa Bay in a bullseye. On that morning, my husband, David Frank Petrano, and I were sitting on the Canandaigua, his sailboat. We were having a cup of coffee. It was a few minutes before 9 in the morning. And we turned on the hurricane news, and it said, landfall predicted for Hurricane Charlie is Clearwater Beach. And about 5 minutes later, we heard firemen and law enforcement officers with loud hailers out in the neighborhood saying, this is a mandatory evacuation zone. You have to evacuate. You have an hour to get off the beach. And we just started grabbing everything on the sailboat, our clothes, our belongings, computers, anything, and throwing them in the little Chrysler car. Throwing them all in there. They weren't organized. Just throwing them in there and throwing everything in there that we had. And then we turned around an hour later and we thought we said goodbye to the Canandaigua forever. And that was the only shelter that we had. It was very traumatic. And after the 2004 hurricanes, and I'll show you some of the pictures of them right now, my husband and I started trying to get the money together to move out of the evacuation zone, off the Florida barrier islands, and move inland, which we ultimately were able to do in June of 2010 when we bought our horse farm in Hawthorne, Florida. So the reason we moved from Pinellas County, Florida to Alachua County, Florida was because of these hurricanes, and we didn't want to be ground zero in a storm surge evacuation zone anymore. 4 hurricanes within about 6 weeks was enough. And Hurricane Charlie was scary because it was a Category 4 hurricane. And so this wasn't out of the ordinary of what most people did, relocated after these hurricanes. Images for these 2004 hurricanes here. And this is what you're getting. You are getting massive destruction. Just massive, massive destruction. Taking roofs off, obliterating buildings, just causing tangled chaos. And this was the 2004 hurricane season here. So this is why my husband and I moved out of Pinellas County, Florida, and moved to Alachua County, Florida. And then it bears repeating, like here's some of the beach houses. It bears repeating that what James K. Fisher did with his knowing falsehood and half-truth and concealing the reason that my husband and I moved from Pinellas County in the 6th Judicial Circuit of Florida to Alachua County in the 8th Judicial Circuit of Florida was to get out of Hurricane Ground Zero. It wasn't to move county to county to file frivolous lawsuits. We didn't want to be in this destruction. And this picture here shows the kind of wave destruction and storm surge destruction we were suffering on the beach during Hurricane Jean and Hurricane Frances. And why this is important is because this falsehood of James K. Fisher, Florida Bar prosecutor, it permeated the thinking of all of our judges in all of our cases, in all of our courts, and why my husband and I kept losing lawsuits that had merit, where we were advised by other Florida Bar members that we needed to file the lawsuit, or a disability rights organization, or a sheriff, or somebody else. And the last one with the waves shows how we lost our vessel mistress case, because U.S. Magistrate Honorable Elizabeth Jenkins wrote that the boats during the hurricane were gently rocking in their berths like rock-a-bye baby, and you'd rock a baby in a cradle. And that wasn't at all what was happening. This is what was happening. And U.S. Magistrate Honorable Elizabeth Jenkins basically really distorted the kind of storm surge and waves that a Category 2 hurricane would bring onto a Florida barrier island. And because of that distortion, we lost our vessel mistress case. So, let's get back to James K. Fisher. James K. Fisher, in the Florida Bar's response to order to show cause, page 5, paragraph 11, in Florida Supreme Court case SC 14-2287, made the knowingly false claim that respondent's history indicates he moves from circuit to circuit throughout the state of Florida, littering the next respective circuit's judicial system with frivolous pleadings. That is absolutely, knowingly, and materially false. James Keith Fisher, Esquire, Florida Bar Prosecutor, made that knowingly false statement to number 1, disbar my husband, David Frank Petrano. Number 2, in this disbarment proceeding, where I was not allowed to be a party and defend my good name, James K. Fisher admitted into evidence to disbar my husband at the Florida Bar's Exhibit number 17 in the disbarment trial of my husband, David Frank Petrano, an affidavit that I wrote solely by myself, that David had nothing to do with, and that only I signed. In addition, I'm severely autistic, and I am a violent rape victim witness survivor with victim rights, and I was thrown out of this evaluation of my husband by this psychiatrist who had no autism training whatsoever. That was the Florida Bar psychiatrist. My husband and I asked the Florida Supreme Court for reasonable accommodations for that evaluation, because you can't just throw an autistic person who can be found and potentially murdered by a rapist or their associates out on a street. And this was admitted as the Florida Bar's Exhibit number 13 in the disbarment trial of my husband in Florida Supreme Court case number SC 14-2287. This complaint was filed solely by me, and not by my husband, and I was completely vilified in my husband's disbarment case, prosecuted by James Keith Fisher, Florida Bar Prosecutor, and I had no standing or right to defend my good name and reputation in that proceeding, because I was not a party to that proceeding, and I could not be made a party to that proceeding. But don't you find it really, really odd and strange that documents I wrote and I signed without my husband involved, without my husband signing it, without my husband writing the words, that those documents of mine were used to take away my husband's attorney license in Florida? That is absurd. That is really absurd. Getting back to this, littering. When you're a hurricane, landfall, strike zone, evacuation zone victim, and you're told there's mandatory evacuation, and you evacuate from hurricanes, and there were 4 hurricanes that year in 2004, And then it took us a while to get the money together. But as soon as we had the money, we moved out of Pinellas County to Alachua County. So, you know, duh. It's a no-brainer. If somebody moves out of hurricane evacuation zone in Pinellas County and moves inland to Alachua County, Florida, they are not, you cannot, it's a falsehood. It's a knowing falsehood. For James Keith Fisher, the Florida bar prosecutor and licensed bar member of 4 states, to tell a Florida bar referee and the Florida Supreme Court that my husband and I, because innuendo and colloquium was, when he said responded, he was referring to me too, because of everything he argued throughout the disbarment implicated me as well, like saying my husband and I were a husband and wife team filing these frivolous pleadings and all this stuff. So to say that when we do what everybody else did, which is evacuate and move inland, because we moved from Pinellas County 6th Judicial Circuit to Alachua County 8th Judicial Circuit, our intent and our motivation was to litter the courts from circuit to circuit and county to county with frivolous lawsuits. Well, you know what? James Keith Fisher in the Florida bar, that's a bald-faced lie. And I'm autistic. And I can't tell a lie when I see one because I'm autistic and I'm gullible and naive. So that amounts also to social discrimination against an autistic adult me. And the Florida Supreme Court bought your lie. And as a result of this, I have been prejudiced and lost every case I filed. And that's just not right to do this and inflict this kind of harm on an autistic woman because you practice law in Illinois and Wisconsin and they never get hit with hurricanes, and you were too lazy and incompetent to articulate and reason in your brain that Florida is a hurricane state and there could be more than one reason somebody moves from one county in judicial circuit to another in Florida. And one of those reasons, and a very good and valid reason, because many other people did it, and you have the proof of the 2004 hurricanes, is to get out of hurricane evacuation zone. Well, how ridiculous and absurd and damaging are these lies of James Keith Fisher, Florida bar prosecutor, and how badly did he misinterpret and misunderstand my autistic language as an autistic witness in my husband's Florida bar disbarment case brought against him. Well, I'll show you how bad he misinterpreted and misunderstood my autistic language.
Welcome to Clearwater Beach. Today we're going to be touring the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. And you can see here how the water literally tore entire chunks of concrete and wall. And I'm going to guess that there's probably 4 feet of sand below our feet right now that wasn't here before, because you can see the base plate of that property wouldn't be 4 feet below the sand. So practically there's a good 3 to 4 feet of sand above the original level, which is what we're standing on now, that got pushed all into Clearwater Beach. It looks like these sand dunes that were here literally got cut in half. The storm surge has a tendency to dig up underneath concrete and lift it up in spots like this. This is what a lot of business fronts look like now. You can see the water mark at about 3 feet. So everything in there is ruined. Some people don't get the memo that it's a construction site, not a vacation rental today, but oh well. Yeah, people are dealing with stressful lives, and they're trying to make the best they can out of their beach weekend. The water line there. Basically, these are pushing 3 feet of water inside and 4 feet of water on the road. And by today, the smell of mold is just repugnant. It's starting to build up in a lot of places and becoming difficult to breathe. I'm going to get asthma tonight.
Husband and father on Clearwater Beach knows that he could have become one of those statistics during the hurricane. He was trapped in storm surge at the height of Helene. Fox 13's Genevieve Curtis tells us that he had to think quick on his feet to be able to make it home to his family.
Just the craziest night of my life.
A terrifying night Tim Cook spent on the roof of his Clearwater Beach home. It didn't start out that way. The wind whipped around them. Water reached the tops of the palm trees. Reality hit.
All anyone had to do to not misinterpret me as an autistic witness and misinterpret the intent and motivation of my husband, David Frank Petrano, and I in moving from Clearwater Beach, Florida, Hurricane Ground Zero evacuation zone and the 6th Judicial Circuit of Florida inland to Alachua County, Florida, and then Bradford County, Florida, and the 8th Judicial Circuit of Florida was think about Florida being a hurricane state. Yeah, James Keith Fisher. It's that easy if you're an honest lawyer. It's that easy. But it wasn't for you. And you disbarred my husband by lying. And then you irreparably prejudiced and tarnished my Florida bar admission by lying. And by colloquium and innuendo, defaming me and lying about me, and saying that when my husband David and I couldn't take it anymore with 4 hurricanes in 2004, and started scraping together the money, which took a couple years to move inland, that our motive and intent was to litter county-to-county circuit court jurisdictions with frivolous lawsuits. I think anyone you're prosecuting, anyone who comes up against you on the opposing side of a case, better start reading everything they've got and looking up everything they've got, because they'll find your lies. Your lies are very harmful. You've inflicted vast emotional distress and money damage on me personally. You have prejudiced and delayed my Florida bar admission for years by your lies, and your lies have been picked up by other cases that I've lost because of what you said. This case here, right here, and that was the case where I asked to be paid for the work I did. 30,000 photos and videos of the riding lessons and equestrian services I provided over a 5-year period, and coming in and taking a third of my farm away without any court order to do so. And I was never paid the money I worked for. That affects my retirement income. I'm severely autistic. And it destroyed and shut down all my riding lessons when that piece of land on my farm was taken. So, yes, your motive and intent falsehoods, James Keith Fisher, that you vilified me personally with in the disbarment case of my husband, David Frank Petrano, not caring what it would do to my own Florida bar admission because of your lies. Well, you know what? All of these pictures of this hurricane damage show you and your lies for what they are. And it shows everything that's wrong with the Florida state courts barring innocent victims under their so-called vexatious and frivolous lawsuit bans and memes from court access. It shows what's wrong with that. Because here we go through it again. Here we go through it again with Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton and people who lived in these flood surge zones and damage zones. They're just like my husband and I were when we moved from Pinellas to Alachua County, Florida. It had nothing to do with doing anything to the courts or moving county to county to litter the counties with frivolous lawsuits, as you falsely said, James Keith Fisher. It had to do with my husband and I did not want to die in a hurricane. We moved inland. And just to remind you how vile and malicious your lies were and continue to be today because you've never corrected them, let's take a look at Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, because it should remind you about what happens and the vast harm when the courts and the neurotypical lawyers misinterpret and misunderstand an autistic person and the autistic person's language, and you fail to provide a Title II American Disabilities Act qualified interpreter and translator. This is the harm. If you like my videos, please hit the notification and subscribe button. You will be informed when I post future videos, and I will be posting future videos on the subject of being an autistic adult, autism in the courts, bar admissions when you're autistic, and of course, my special interest that's been trained into the only work I can do, which is with horses and ponies. Thank you for watching. And in ending, here's how malicious the lie was of James Keith Fisher, Florida bar prosecutor, that directly caused me injury in fact. This is all Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton damage. And it just is a repeat of 2004 hurricanes, 4 of them that struck the state of Florida within a 6-week period when my husband and I were living on Clearwater Beach in evacuation zone.